For 20 years, the world had tried everything to fix him. Top surgeons from New York, neurologists from London, specialists flown in from Switzerland. None of them could change what had become the most expensive medical mystery in the country. Ethan Caldwell was once the youngest tech billionaire in America, a man who built an empire before turning 30, a man who could predict markets, outsmart competitors, and control entire industries with a single decision. But none of that mattered anymore, because for the last 2 decades, Ethan Caldwell had been trapped inside his own body, paralyzed from the neck down, unable to walk, unable to move, unable to live the life he once built with his own hands. And no one knew why. The accident had happened on a rainy night. A private car, a long highway, a sudden crash that investigators never fully explained. Some called it fate, others called it sabotage, but the official report was simple: spinal trauma with no reversible damage. Except that wasn't the truth, because Ethan's spine was not completely destroyed, and yet his body refused to respond. His mansion on the edge of the city became a silent hospital. Machines beeped through marble halls. Nurses rotated every few hours. Doctors came and left with the same expression, confusion hiding behind professionalism. And Ethan watched everything from a custom medical bed that cost more than most hospitals. His eyes were the only part of him still alive in the way he remembered. Sharp, angry, aware. Mr. Caldwell, there is no further treatment we can suggest. One specialist said during a meeting years ago, "We've exhausted every known neurological pathway." Another added carefully, "At this stage, recovery is statistically impossible." Statistically impossible. Ethan hated those words more than the paralysis itself, because statistics didn't care about who he used to be. Time passed. Companies changed leadership. Fortunes grew. And Ethan Caldwell became a legend that slowly turned into a cautionary tale. A man who had everything until he had nothing, except consciousness. But something strange began happening in the 20th year. It started small. A twitch, not in his hands, not in his legs, but in a finger he hadn't moved in years. The nurses dismissed it. Could be nerve noise, one said. Muscle memory reflex, said another. But Ethan knew what he felt. It wasn't random. It was control, even if it lasted only a second. That same week, something else changed. A new caretaker was assigned to his estate after yet another staff rotation. A man nobody expected to matter. A single father. A delivery driver. Daniel Reed. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a specialist. He didn't have certifications framed on his wall or awards behind his name. He had something far simpler. A worn-out uniform, tired eyes, and a quiet way of speaking like life had already tested him and failed to break him completely. The first time Daniel entered the mansion, he paused at the entrance, not because he was impressed, but because the silence felt heavy. Too heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath. "You're the new temporary assistant?" a nurse asked him, scanning his paperwork. "Yes," Daniel replied calmly. "Just here for deliveries and basic support tasks." She nodded without interest. People like him came and went quickly. No one expected them to matter. Daniel was assigned simple routines: bringing supplies, checking equipment logs, helping reposition medical items. Nothing that required expertise, and definitely nothing that could change a life like Ethan Caldwell's. But Daniel noticed something strange on his second day. Ethan's eyes followed him. Not in a casual way, in a precise way, like tracking movement, like measuring intention, like someone who hadn't stopped thinking for even a second in 20 years. Most staff avoided eye contact with Ethan. It made them uncomfortable. But Daniel didn't. He didn't treat Ethan like a patient. He treated him like a person trapped in silence. On the third day, Daniel did something no one else did. He spoke to him, not to the nurses, not about him, to him. Morning, Daniel said while adjusting in forced stand, "It's going to rain again today." No response, but Ethan's eye moved slightly. Not much, just enough. Daniel didn't expect anything from it. He simply continued talking during his tasks. About weather, about traffic, about his daughter who refused to eat vegetables, about how deliveries doubled on weekends. Small things, Normal life things. Things that didn't belong in a room filled with machines and silence. And then it happened again. The twitch, this time in Ethan's hand. Faster, stronger, undeniable. A nurse noticed. His vitals are stable, she said quickly. Don't overinterpret it. But Daniel didn't say anything. He just watched, because he had seen something similar once before. Not in a hospital, but in his own life. Years ago, after his wife left, after bills piled up, after he became both mother and father overnight. His daughter had stopped speaking for weeks, not because she couldn't, but because she chose not to, until one day she spoke again, not because someone forced her, but because someone treated her like she still existed. Daniel didn't know it yet, but that memory would become the key to everything. That night, something unusual happened. Ethan's monitor showed a sudden spike in neural activity. No medical trigger, no medication change, no intervention, just response. Raw and unexplained. The head nurse called it in immediately. Within hours, the mansion was alerted. And for the first time in years, Ethan Caldwell was no longer just stable. He was reacting. A senior neurologist arrived the next morning. He reviewed the scans twice, then a third time. This is impossible, he muttered. But the data didn't lie. Something inside Ethan's nervous system was waking up, slowly, unpredictably, but undeniably. And in the corner of the room, Daniel Reed stood quietly holding a clipboard, not knowing that his presence had just begun to rewrite 20 years of failure. The mansion was no longer quiet, not in the same way it used to be, because silence changes, meaning the moment hope enters the room. And now, after 20 long years, hope had started to behave like a disturbance. Ethan Caldwell lay motionless in his medical bed, surrounded by blinking monitors and anxious specialists. But something had shifted, not in the machines. In him, small, irregular bursts in neural activity continued appearing on the scans, like a signal trying to break through heavy static. And every spike seemed to align with one thing, one presence. Daniel Reed. At first, the doctors refused to accept the pattern. It's coincidence, one neurologist insisted. Environmental noise, another suggested. But the head nurse wasn't convinced anymore, because coincidence doesn't repeat itself with precision, and science doesn't usually follow a person around a room. Daniel, however, remained unaware of the storm he was causing. He continued his routine work, deliveries, adjustments, quiet conversations that no one else paid attention to. But Ethan did, always. On the fifth day, Daniel entered the room carrying a simple food tray meant for staff records. As he placed it down, he spoke casually. My daughter drew a spaceship yesterday, said it can fly without fuel. A pause. Then something subtle happened. Ethan's finger moved again. Not a twitch this time. A deliberate flex. A nurse dropped her pen. Did you see that? She whispered. But Daniel didn't react. He just nodded slightly, as if acknowledging something unspoken. I think he hears me, Daniel said softly. The room fell silent, because that statement wasn't scientific. It was instinct. That evening, the hospital team ran a full neurological scan, while Daniel was present, and for the first time in 20 years, Ethan's brain activity surged beyond baseline thresholds. Memory centers lit up, motor cortex pathways activated, and then a sharp spike, like a locked door suddenly rattled from inside. This is not spontaneous recovery, the senior neurologist said, staring at the screen. This is targeted response. But to what? That question hung heavier than the diagnosis itself. Later that night, Daniel was asked to stay longer than usual. Not officially, not openly, just encouraged. The head nurse approached him quietly. When you speak to him, she said, something changes. Daniel shrugged slightly. I'm just talking. That's exactly the problem, she replied. Meanwhile, Ethan's condition continued to shift in unpredictable patterns. Some muscles responded, then stopped, then responded again hours later. It was as if his nervous system was remembering something it had once forgotten, or worse, something it had been forced to ignore. The hospital brought in more specialists, psychiatrists, neurologists, even biofeedback experts. But none of them could explain the same conclusion forming in silence. Ethan wasn't just medically paralyzed. Something deeper was involved. Something connected to perception, emotion, memory. And Daniel was the only variable that changed. On the seventh night, something unprecedented happened. Daniel was finishing his shift when a junior doctor rushed into the hallway. "Come quickly," she said urgently. "Now." He followed without question. Inside the room, Ethan's eyes were open wider than usual, not blinking, focused, locked onto Daniel with unsettling precision. The monitors were unstable, heart rate elevated, brain activity erratic but intense. The neurologist stepped forward. "This is the highest neural activation we've ever recorded in him." Then, after a pause, "And it's sustained." Daniel stood near the bed, unsure whether to step closer or back away. "Should I leave?" he asked quietly. No one answered immediately, because Ethan's response came first. A slow movement, barely visible, but intentional. His hand lifted, half an inch. The entire room froze. A 20-year silence had just been interrupted by motion, not reflex, not spasm, control. The head nurse covered her mouth. "This is impossible." But Daniel only stared, not shocked, not afraid, just focused, like he was trying to remember something he couldn't quite place. Then Ethan did something no one expected. His lips parted slightly. No words formed. But the effort was there, a signal trying to escape. The neurologist immediately ordered a stabilization scan. But Daniel raised his hand slightly. "Wait." Everyone turned toward him. He didn't look at them. He was looking at Ethan. "I think he's trying to say something." The room went silent again. Ethan's breathing changed. Slower, more controlled. And then, for the first time in 20 years, a whisper sound. Broken, fragile, but real. It wasn't a word. It was a name, or something close to one. Something that made Daniel's expression shift for the first time. A flicker of recognition. And in that moment, the impossible stopped being theoretical. Because whatever connected these two men was no longer hidden in medical charts. It was alive, right there in the room. The room no longer felt like a hospital. It felt like a courtroom where the truth was finally being forced into the open. Ethan Caldwell lay trembling in stillness, his body barely responding. But his mind now fully awake in a way it hadn't been for 20 years. And standing beside him was the only person who had ever changed that condition, Daniel Reed. But neither of them understood the full truth yet. Not completely. The whisper Ethan had made earlier echoed in Daniel's mind. It wasn't a word. It wasn't random. It felt familiar. Too familiar. Like something buried deep in time. The neurologist finally broke the silence. "We need to consider an external neurological trigger," he said. "This reaction is not spontaneous. It is memory-linked." The psychiatrist added carefully, "Emotional conditioning may be involved." But Daniel shook his head slowly. "No," he said quietly. "This isn't conditioning." He paused. "It's recognition." That word changed the atmosphere in the room. Recognition implies history. History implies connection. And connection implies something no one had considered in 20 years of treatment. The head nurse stepped forward hesitantly. "Daniel, has anything like this ever happened before? Have you met Mr. Caldwell in the past?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. For the first time, his calm expression shifted, not into fear, not into confusion, but into something heavier. Memory. He looked at Ethan, and something inside him clicked. Flashback. A rainy night. A highway glowing under broken streetlights. Metal screaming against metal. A crushed luxury car. And a man trapped inside it. Years before he became a delivery driver. Before he became a father. Before life narrowed down to survival. Daniel Reed had been just another man driving home late at night. Until he saw the crash. He had stopped. No hesitation. No calculation. Just instinct. Inside the wreckage was a young man barely conscious. Bleeding. Trapped. Eyes still open. Still aware. Still fighting. That man was younger. Strong. Powerful. But fading fast. It was Ethan Caldwell. Daniel remembered pulling him out. Not alone, he had called emergency services, but he was the one who stayed, held pressure on the wound, spoke to him through broken breaths, kept him awake until help arrived. And before Ethan lost consciousness completely, he had spoken one sentence, a promise: "I will remember you." The memory hit Daniel like a shockwave. His breath slowed, his hands tightened slightly, because he realized something terrifying. He had never told anyone about that night, not even his daughter, not even the system, because after that moment, Ethan disappeared from public awareness, and Daniel's life collapsed into its own struggles. But now the truth was no longer in the past. It was sitting right in front of him, breathing, watching, remembering. Ethan's fingers moved again, stronger this time, more controlled. And then his eyes shifted, locking onto Daniel with unmistakable intensity. The neurologist whispered, "This is impossible. He's responding at a cognitive recognition level." But the head nurse wasn't looking at the machines anymore. She was looking at Ethan's expression. And for the first time in 20 years, it wasn't empty. It was emotional. Daniel stepped closer. "I didn't know who you were after that night," he said quietly. "I thought you survived and moved on." A pause. "But I guess part of you didn't." Ethan's lips moved again, this time clearer, strained, but forming structure. The room held its breath, because the man who hadn't spoken in 2 decades was finally trying again. And this time, it worked. A single word escaped. Not broken, not accidental. Clear enough for everyone to hear. "Why?" Silence exploded through the room, because that wasn't just a word. It was a question buried under 20 years of paralysis, silence, and unanswered history. Daniel's eyes lowered, not in shame, but in understanding. "I think your body never fully healed," he said slowly, "because your mind never stopped holding on to that moment." The neurologist stepped forward urgently. "What are you saying?" Daniel exhaled. "I'm saying he didn't just survive the crash. He survived me." The room froze again, because now everything made sense in a way science could not comfortably accept. The paralysis wasn't just damage. It was locked response. A mind trapped in a moment it never released. And the only person who could break that loop was the one who pulled him out of it. Ethan's hand finally rose again. Not a twitch, not resistance, but full control. Slow, deliberate, and it reached toward Daniel. For the first time in 20 years, he made contact, a hand touching another hand. Human to human, past to present, silence to voice. And in that moment, something extraordinary happened. The monitors spiked, then stabilized, then normalized. Because sometimes healing doesn't begin in operating rooms. Sometimes it begins with recognition and forgiveness. And the moment someone finally says, "I remember you too,"